Perhaps unsurprisingly, in today's charged political climate, there are renewed calls for certain teams to change their names. Are there teams that really should do this? What teams should they be? Let's dive down that rabbit hole. We have heard the names of some of the teams that there is pressure on owners to change the name for reasons that they are considered by many, by some, to be politically not good, morally not good, ethnically not good, racially not good, whatever you want to call it. Steve Milton, should team names be on the chopping block, be on the changing block in 2020?
Yeah, they should. And I've felt that for a long, long time, particularly about the obviously ones we're talking about here. The two most obvious being, of course, the most egregious at this moment would be the Washington Redskins, of course, because of there's just almost no defense of that. You could mount a defense in some way for Cleveland Indians, but not in the way that's been used. And I would take a look too at the Fighting Irish, as well. We've talked a lot in the show, in a brief history of this show, about time for action as opposed to time for consciousness raising. And action comes in a lot of ways, and we're seeing it now. And I applaud it. Yes, there are some loopholes and potholes in this thing, but yes.
Bubba?
I've always been of the belief, guys, that if two people question a nickname, it's worth an investigation. There are many names that I have heard in sports that don't necessarily offend me, but if there are names, and it will specifically say in my case here, the Inuit community with Eskimos.
Yeah.
Now, for the major part of my CFL fandom, I didn't really understand that Eskimos bothered people. But if there's a community of people out there that are either outraged or offended or bothered by the name, I think, again, I think I said earlier, I think there's really an investigation that needs to be had, because most of us generally don't understand why someone else is upset about a particular name or nickname. So, yeah, I'm for all these changes.
Rick?
Well, I don't think any of the teams way back when they were first founded thought, let's think of the most racially charged nickname and go with that. Some have it. The Washington Redskins are probably at the top of the list. And if I were to change one, that would be the one. But whether you're looking at the Cleveland Indians or the Chicago Blackhawks or the Edmonton Eskimos, there's conversations being had around all these nicknames. Are they offensive or not? It's good that we're having this conversation, but I would only consider one, and that being the Redskins being the most offensive, at least to me. And I'm not of Indigenous background, but I can understand why people would be up in arms, and that one should be changed.
Okay, so that's two of the three of you, and maybe three if I missed it, who have said that the Redskins should be at the very top of the list. And I think that there are a number of people who would agree with that, but where does the line get drawn? And the reason is, I was thinking even today of a bunch of names that we don't even really necessarily talk about, and I suppose they are grades in people's mind of offensive, but should any name that refers to anything to do with any racial element of anything be on the chopping block, or are there some that we say, no, we're okay with those?
Well, I drew the line at Redskins, but Steve brought a good one up, and I never thought of this, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I would never have thought that would be, a derogatory or even racist nickname. But yeah, if we're going to add that to the list, why not anything, the blank Americans? People can make a case that, that's derogatory. That should not be used because you're condescending against an entire nation or a group of people. I think there has to be a line drawn. Otherwise, every nickname could be targeted.
The question is, who draws that line? Where do you draw that line, and what's based upon? I think that's what Scott's getting at, aren't you, Scott?
Yeah, well, there's no official arbiter for this, so it becomes a societal discussion. And where do we find that spot where we say that is okay, or that just a little bit more, that's too offensive?
Well, the first thing that's deciding this, and let's not make any mistake where the Redskins things is now coming from, because it's been adamant by the ownership there that they would not change that name, partly because of the historical branding that they have. Well, why is this sudden change? It's economic, right? And that is in all movements in all social movements, whether they're left wing, right wing, positive, negative in history, there is a turning point. And we may be like at a shift where you just cross that line of critical mass, and we may be at that shift in North America. The other thing I want to say about that is that the whole thing is this whole situation with everything being on the table now, and I like it. I like the frank and ugly discussions we're being forced to have, partly because the pandemic has exposed some things, but partly because Black Lives Matter and all of the Me Too movement, all of those kinds of things have forced us to look at things. And one of the things that it's forced us to look at is the way Canadian history has been taught, and that's why we all don't know about Eskimos.
Well, and for me, and this may be arrogant, I don't think there is a line, guys. That line can be made by a particular race, and no offense, but generally by white males. And I as I said earlier, we have gone through many, many years of these nicknames being used because mostly white males haven't been offended by these names because it doesn't affect them. But like I said earlier, if it is affecting a particular portion of the community, then it really needs to be looked at. And there is no line. Everything is on the table, right? Times have changed. And it is now time to look at these names that we've been carried for 25, 50, 100 years. The discussion is worth there. Will every name change? Probably not. But if it should be on the table, because just because it doesn't affect you doesn't mean it doesn't affect someone else.
Yeah,
Okay,
I don't want my point misunderstood about the money thing. That's what I want to say. That's the only reason that the real action has been happening.
Yes.
I don't want to say that I believe in that as a principle. Is that's the way it should change. I'm saying let's not make a mistake that this is a moral decision.
No, there's no doubt. I mean, and this is why Daniel Snyder will capitulate, because you have FedEx, you have McDonald's, you have these big giant companies now based in Nike. Now, he stands to lose. And I believe the
Walmart, Target won't sell their stuff as of today.
I hear it's $625 million he stands to lose if he doesn't make some type of change. So a guy like him makes the change on an economic basis. But I think on the broad basis, that the discussion for everything should be out there. It really should be. Because again, like I said, just because it doesn't affect you or me or him doesn't mean it doesn't affect someone else. And that's why I think Eskimos is on the table too.
Not to sound trivial, but I think there is, I mean, there is a line out there. And, who's going to argue that the Flames isn't a derogatory nickname, or, the Washington Nationals, or the San Diego Padres, the Dodgers, name your team nickname. And is anyone going to have an issue with that? That's the natural line that there is. And everything that's on the other side should be intensely looked at.
Somebody said, and I think it was Bubba, I'm not sure, and Bubba, forgive me if it wasn't you, but said if one or two people think that it's offensive, then it should be discussed. Well, let me tell you another name that just came up. All right. Another name that just came up. And if we're going to apply that, there are now calls, and it's a small number of people right now who are starting it, saying that the name of the Masters should be changed because it has a slave connotation. Now, the Masters was not named because of slave reasons. It was named because you were the masters of golf. But if one or two people's offense matters that much, should the Masters name be on the table to be changed?
But this is Scott. I'm saying I'm not. I mean, maybe I didn't articulate myself correctly here. I didn't say that it needs to be changed, but I think a small discussion needs to be had.
What about the Masters?
And that's why I say everything is on the table, because, and like I said, not everything will change. But I think we should all be open as people to say, you know what, never really thought about that, guys. And we've said that just in this 5-minute discussion.
See, and the reason I mentioned the Masters, and we've got two ends of the extreme here. You've got the Redskins that, I think a lot of people, maybe most people would say, yeah, I can certainly see that one. The problem when you have now groups that start to mention things like the Masters, I think you dilute the argument to the point that a lot of these things then become not important. And then all the things in between those two extremes start to become mush, and you can't really have a discussion because because somebody has decided that we have to take the extreme end and turn everything on its head. Look, I don't think anyone here is disagreeing with the discussion about the Redskins. But
yeah, well, it could be that I think what you're saying, and we're kind of leading, anything that has anything to do with humans may have may have, if you ultimately extend the spectrum, could I mean, you could. What about Lumberjacks? What about
What about the Canucks?
Canucks? All of those kinds of things. Where do we want to be thought of that as the name that Americans used for us, which would for many years was a derogatory thing, which we take as pride, of course, but those kinds of things, and that's why I think you have to have certain discussions about it and bring it out. I mean, the Redskins, there's no other applicable word, right? I mean, there's no other applicable meaning of that kind of thing. Where you get into some things is a bit like Warriors and those kinds of things, which have other connotations besides Indigenous peoples, historically. But I still would say, what the heck? What is the principle for hanging on to some things if it offends? And again, like Bubba says, you got to take a look at if you're the team that owns or the people that own the team, which would be the case, say, in professional sport, or if in high school sport or in university sport, where you're using government funds partly to be involved in that team, where now you can get into some legal looks at those kinds of things. I think you have to examine all of them and then see where you go from there. And what is the right to hang on to something? There's a branding right. There's a certain right of business, of course, which has very strong interests behind it.
Well, if you're private, Steve, there's an absolute right. It doesn't mean that you're going to not lose money, but Daniel Snyder has the absolute right to hold on to the name Redskins if he wants to.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Money or economics has power. Whether they should have that power in cases like this is it's a much larger debate than a bunch of knobs like us are going to be able to do.
No, but truthfully, I would rather have people flex their economic power to make change than to have governments start to decide who can or can't use what words. Now we're starting to get into a 1984 thing, and now this again is the extreme.
There's no doubt, but I'm not for absolute free reign on this. I'm not for. There's a difference between freedom and license, and there always will be.
I think there's two things that Daniel Snyder, the owner of the Redskins, should take into account. And number one, yes, 3 of his minority owners that consume 40% of the franchise are looking to sell. And that's an obvious sign that they're not happy with this situation. But there's also an opportunity for Mr. Snyder and everyone associated with the Redskins, and that's a financial one as well. Change the nickname, create some new merchandise, create a new logo, and if it's done right, can be an economic boom for this franchise, because how many jerseys are being sold, ball caps, whatever the case is, you create something new, there's an economic benefit to that. The other point I want to make is the Chicago Blackhawks came out just recently and said, we're having this discussion. It's great that we're talking about our nickname and our emblem. That's, the crest that's on the front of their sweater. But at the end of the day, they're keeping it because there's an important history lesson to be told. It's about, one of the First Nations in that area that they're honoring with their logo and with, the franchise that's obviously one of the original 6 franchises, and they're going to keep that nickname. So, there's 2 ends to the spectrum of this. One is a financial one is a history lesson, and the Blackhawks are certainly focused on the latter.
But that's the key, Rick, is that the open discussion was there and the appropriate people were probably contacted. And you know what? There are going to be surprises in there where particular groups of the community are going to say, no, we're honored by that name, right? And again, Redskins is just so egregious that of course, that has to be eliminated and should have been eliminated a long time ago. But a rather stubborn owner has basically said, for many years, I think he's owned the team since '99, I'm never changing the name. But again, the climate has changed in our world today, where I think, again, and the economic pressure is going to have him make some adjustments, or at least certainly consider it. And going back to Masters, Scott, you're talking about a golf course that's in the deep South that did not allow Black people to golf on it. I believe Calvin Peete might have been the first in the early 80s to actually be on the course and golf competitively. I think, it's worth a discussion. And I know that for the average, hate to say it, guys, the average white male, they're going to sit there and say, here we go, being politically correct again. It's because it doesn't affect you. And again, this is why these discussions in this changing time need to happen. And yes, there's going to be people that just say that, here we go again. But again, because it doesn't affect you, does not mean it does not affect someone else. So I think the discussion needs to be had. Doesn't mean everything's going to be changed, but again, the discussion needs to be had.
There's a one of the things that's happened during this whole period here, where a lot of things are coming together and creating a state of flux here, is that it is a chance to make some change. And what we're looking at professional sports role in things is I've always felt professional sports the last 15, 20 years was getting way too top heavy and wasn't necessarily representative of what movements were going on in society. And I think this is a good time for sport itself to almost overdo it. And every movement throughout history, no matter what it is, there's a pendulum swing because it was over here and sometimes it swings. Some people would say too far, and that's where the line that Scott has been talking about, whatever that line is, whatever you may believe it is, probably gets past sometime. But that is the price of the previous history for being it too far the other way.
The concern that I have with this is when that pendulum swings that far, that important discussions that you have get lost with unimportant discussions, that things that are legitimately offensive to a lot of people get blended in with things that everyone else or many other people then shake their head and go, this is just ludicrous, and the message gets lost. The message gets so muddied and so muddled.
I agree with that, but that boat's left the harbor, unfortunately, because of social media. Because of social media, that boat is never coming back into the harbor.
Yes and no, Steve. I mean, there with certain things, yes, but again, use the example, and I'm using the Masters example only because I don't know about you guys. Never once when I heard someone refer to the Masters golf tournament did I think of slavery. I thought of people mastering the game of golf. That's always until someone mentioned it, I had never considered it. And Steve, you've mentioned even a few team names here that never dawned on me. The Warriors. Never dawned on me that someone might consider that one to be offensive or indigenous or something else. I thought of people who were I mean, we've had Viking warriors. We've had whatever. Choose your color, your race, whatever. Is warrior now a name that carries a connotation? Never dawned on me. You start getting into the weeds here. And then to me, again, the important discussions get lost because they've all been distilled and watered down and now we can't have.
It is important, but Scott, it is an important discussion. It's not watered down again because it doesn't affect you. I'll repeat it 1,000 times in our discussion. Because it doesn't affect you, it doesn't water it down. It's someone that may be affected by it. That's someone that maybe didn't have a large enough voice for a particular point of history, didn't really feel like they had the right, they didn't feel the right, or they didn't have enough guts. Or now, again, Scott, Steve, you brought it up with social media. Finally, they feel like they can say what they actually feel, but maybe what they've been holding in for 50 years. And I think Masters is on the table. This is a state that's well known for Black people picking cotton. People that did the same right around the fields of the grounds of that golf course, which is arguably one of the most beautiful places on planet Earth in terms of golf. So I think the discussion is definitely open because you're talking about a golf course and owners and members at that time that were slave owners. So I think it is on the table.
The other thing, too, to consider is, whenever an issue pops up, whether it's sports related or not, is how many people are on one side compared to the other. Do you have 3 people who are against the Masters, wanting to change that name, or do you have 3 million people against that? Sometimes it's hard to differentiate, who has the louder voice and who has the most important voice, or how many people are with an associated group. Not to say that doesn't matter, but I think that has to be taken in perspective in terms of how many people want change, as opposed to is it just a handful of people calling for change.
And that again goes to Steve's point about economics. If you have a large enough group, if this resonates with enough people, then economics will drive it. I mean, I
don't want it to be the only thing that drives it.
But it's reality. It's reality, though.
Well,
look, the Cleveland Indians, I've said it for a long, long time. Now, the Indians, there's some confusion around the team name. There are many people who say it was named for Alex Sokolexis, who was an Indian player who died, and they said then it was a way that they said we can remember him. Who knows what the real history is? But I've long argued that if you want to hold on to history and economics, there was a team there called the Cleveland Spiders. In 2020, with people who are graphic designers and everything else, you could do amazing things with a Spider team name, Spider team logo. You still maintain some history, and you could sell hundreds of millions of dollars worth of stuff. Economically, then, You say, all right, we can maintain the history that we want, and we can come out of this better at the other end. Why not do it?
Well, that's true, and I think you're touching on a little point here that there's a bit of irony in this. It's hard to say that in an intellectual argument that you want to maintain the history of the franchise while ignoring the history of the world and the culture surrounding which Bubba has really got me thinking about the Masters here. I really have to think that at first I didn't dismiss it, but I thought, I don't even know if this is worth thinking about. But and I knew all the factors, but until he put it as passionately as he did, it's got me right here thinking about it a little more than I did an hour ago, which is why you have these discussions. You don't get that economic movement that's affecting the Redskins and potentially the Indians at this point in time, and maybe the Eskimos eventually, without these kinds of discussions having been had in embryonic form 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it's taken this long to reach the point of a critical mass. But you don't have them without having those discussions that Bubba's referring to.
What do you think? Do you agree with name changes? Do you disagree? Do you think that there is a line? Do you think that anything should be on the table? We'd love to hear from you. You can see our Twitter handles. They've been on the screen. They're going to be on again. Let us know. Comment. Subscribe down below so you can follow along with all of our videos. We would love to have you join us. Bubba just said goodbye early. We will talk to you soon.